The night was electric. The VIP section of the club shimmered under the dim neon lights, the bass of the music vibrating through the air. I stood at my post, a sturdy figure in a black suit, earpiece snug in my ear, scanning every guest who approached the velvet rope. My job was simple: keep out the uninvited, the troublemakers, the ones who thought money or fame could bend the rules. Tonight was no different, or so I thought. I had been working security for years. I'd seen it all. Celebrities trying to sneak in with entourages too big. Influencers throwing tantrums when their names weren't on the list. Even some high-rolling businessmen slipping $100 bills into my palm, hoping to bypass protocol. But I prided myself on my integrity. If your name wasn't on my list, you weren't getting past me. A black SUV rolled up outside, its sleek exterior gleaming under the flashing lights of paparazzi cameras. The back door opened, and a tall figure stepped out. He was massive, easily over 7 feet tall, broad shoulders filling out his loose-fitting hoodie. He moved with the kind of casual confidence that only comes with the knowing the world bends slightly to your presence. But I had a job to do. As he approached the entrance, the crowd around the club seemed to react to him. Murmurs spread, phones lifted to capture his presence. But none of that mattered to me. If he wasn't on the list, he wasn't getting in. "Excuse me, sir," I said, stepping forward, planting my feet firmly on the ground. "VIP access is restricted tonight. I'll need to see your credentials." The man paused, adjusting the hoodie draped over his head. He pulled it back slightly, revealing a familiar face. Something about him tugged at the edge of my memory, but I couldn't place it immediately. His expression was calm, almost amused. "I don't need credentials," he said, his voice deep and steady. I had heard that before. Everyone thought they were important enough to skip the process. I shook my head. "If you're not on my list, I can't let you in. Name?" He exhaled a small chuckle, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe this was happening. The murmurs around us grew louder. People were watching. Someone in the crowd muttered a name, but I barely caught it. My focus was on doing my job right. "I'm Big Shaq," he said finally, folding his arms over his massive chest. The name hit me like a slow realization, but I kept my composure. I had heard of Big Shaq, some rapper, comedian, or something along those lines. But names alone didn't get people inside. There were rules. I glanced at my list, scrolling through the approved guests. His name wasn't there. I looked back up at him, unwavering. "I'm sorry, sir, but you're not on the list." The expression on his face shifted slightly. Not anger, not frustration, but something between disbelief and mild amusement. The people around us reacted, whispering louder. Some of them laughed under their breath, waiting to see how this would play out. "Really?" he asked, tilting his head. I stood my ground. Rules are rules. For a brief moment, silence hung in the air. The club's bass thumped in the background. A camera flash went off somewhere behind me. He studied me, and I studied him right back. I didn't care who he was. All I cared about was the list. And he wasn't on it. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me like I was some kind of anomaly, like he couldn't believe I wasn't budging. The air between us grew thick with tension, though he didn't seem angry. If anything, he looked amused. People around us started whispering louder. Some of them had pulled out their phones, likely recording the exchange, anticipating some kind of dramatic showdown. A few called out to me, "Yo, man, that's Big Shaq. You don't know Big Shaq. Others laughed. Ain't no way, bro. He's really stopping Shaq at the door. I ignored the noise. I had learned long ago that the moment you let the crowd influence your decision, you lost control. So I kept my stance, arms crossed, and repeated myself. I'm sorry, sir. I don't see your name on the list. He exhaled, shaking his head, then leaned in slightly, his towering frame making me feel small for the first time tonight. You're serious about this, huh? I nodded. I take my job seriously. A slow smirk spread across his face, and then he did something unexpected. He took out his phone. Let's do this your way. He tapped the screen a few times, then held it up to his ear. I could hear the ringing from where I stood. A few seconds passed before someone on the other end picked up. Yo, Shaq said casually, glancing at me. Yeah, I'm at the door. Security says I'm not on the list. The voice on the other end, whoever it was, started talking fast. Shaq just listened, nodding along, his smirk growing wider. Then he extended the phone toward me. Here, talk to him. I hesitated. Sir, take the phone, he insisted, his voice still calm, but firm. I took the phone reluctantly and pressed it to my ear. Hello? Are you serious right now? The voice on the other end practically yelled. Do you even know who you're stopping? I kept my posture straight. I'm just following protocol. His name isn't on the list. Forget the list. That's Shaq. He doesn't need a damn list. I closed my eyes for a moment. I had a feeling I was going to get chewed out for this later, but I had done this job long enough to know that if you start making exceptions, the whole system crumbles. I took a breath and handed the phone back. I still can't let you in, I said. Shaq blinked, then actually laughed. A deep rumbling laugh that made the crowd murmur even louder. He put the phone back to his ear. You hear that? He chuckled, listening for a second before shaking his head. Nah, it's cool. I like this dude. He ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket. Then stepping closer, he looked me up and down. So what's your deal, man? You really don't recognize me? I shrugged. I know who you are, sir, but rules are rules. He nodded slowly, as if he respected that. All right, so let's say I ain't on your list. What's the move? You gonna make me leave? The way he said it wasn't aggressive, just curious, like he was testing me. I straightened up. If you're not on the list, I can't let you in? Another low chuckle. Man, I respect the hustle. At that moment, someone from inside the club finally noticed the situation. A man in a sleek suit came rushing toward us, his face pale when he realized who was being held at the door. He skidded to a stop beside me, panting. What's going on here? Before I could answer, Shaq gestured toward me. Your man's just doing his job, holding the line. No name on the list, no entry. The manager's face turned red as he shot me a horrified glance. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, sir. Of course you're allowed in. Please, right this way. He reached for the velvet rope, but Shaq didn't move. He just kept looking at me, like he was waiting to see what I'd do. The energy in the crowd shifted. Everyone watching, waiting, whispering. I could have backed down. Could have let him in now that the manager had given the green light. But something in me told me to stand firm. Sir, I said calmly, I appreciate your patience, but I still need to follow procedure. If he's allowed in, I need verification from the right channels. The manager looked like he was about to faint. He is the right channel? Shaq, on the other hand, let out another deep laugh, shaking his head. Man, I really like you. But the tension wasn't over yet. Because just then, from behind me, another security guard, a guy I barely knew, but had worked a few shifts with, stepped forward, clearly trying to smooth things over. Hey man, he muttered under his breath. Just let him in. It's Shaq. You don't want to go viral for the wrong reasons. I felt my jaw tighten. Not because he was wrong, but because I knew this was one of those moments. One of those tests life throws at you when you least expect it. The easy thing would be to step aside and let Shaq in. The hard thing, the right thing, was to stick to the rules. So I took a deep breath, looked up at the 7-foot legend towering over me, and said the only thing I knew to be true. With all due respect, sir, if I make an exception for you, I have to make an exception for everyone. Silence. For the first time since this whole thing started, Shaq's smile faded just a little. Not in a bad way. More like he was actually thinking about what I had said. The crowd, the cameras, the whispers, it all faded into the background for a second. Then slowly, that smirk crept back onto his face. You're different, he muttered, almost to himself. And that's when I knew. Something was about to change. For a moment, everything was still. The crowd, the flashing cameras, the bass thumping from inside the club. It all faded into the background as Shaq studied me. His expression had shifted. The amusement was still there, but now something else lingered behind his eyes. Something thoughtful. He nodded slowly, as if coming to a conclusion in his mind. You really believe that, huh? I didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. A low chuckle rumbled from his chest. He turned slightly, glancing at the people around us. The murmurs had quieted, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Then, in one smooth motion, he reached up and pulled off his hoodie completely. The second he did, the energy around us changed. People gasped. Some shouted his name louder. Phones were now held even higher, recording from every angle. It was as if the full realization of who he was had just hit the crowd all at once. And I felt it too. Of course, I had recognized his name. I knew he was famous. But standing here now, with the lights catching the unmistakable features of one of the greatest basketball legends of all time, the weight of the situation finally sank in. This wasn't just Big Shaq. This was Shaquille O'Neal, a man whose face was plastered across billboards, a legend who had dominated the NBA for years, a businessman, a media personality, an icon. And I had just refused him entry to a VIP section. I felt the weight of the moment pressing on me, but I didn't let it shake my resolve. I had done my job. I had followed protocol. And yet, a small part of me wondered if I had just made the biggest mistake of my career. Shaq glanced at the manager, who was still frozen in horror, then back at me. What's your name? He asked. I hesitated for half a second before answering. Marcus? He nodded again, repeating the name like he was committing it to memory. Then, much to my surprise, he reached out a massive hand. I looked at it, unsure, for a second before shaking it. His grip was firm, completely engulfing my own. You got integrity, Marcus. His voice was serious now, no longer just amused, no longer testing me. There was something genuine in his words. I respect that, he continued. Most people would have folded the second they saw my face. You didn't. The manager let out a nervous laugh, trying to salvage the situation. Of course. Marcus is one of our best guys. That's why he's on the front door. He's great at his job. I wasn't sure if that was an attempt to back me up or save himself, but Shaq ignored him. His focus was still on me. Tell me something, he said, crossing his arms. Why do you follow the rules so strictly? You afraid of getting fired? I straightened up. It's not about fear. It's about respect. If I start making exceptions, then the rules don't mean anything. I don't care if someone's rich, famous, or powerful. If I have a job to do, I do it right. Shaq studied me for a long moment. Then, something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not the amused smirk from earlier, but something real. I like you, Marcus. I blinked. Thank you, sir. He chuckled. Nah, I mean it. You remind me of myself back in the day. Stubborn, focused, not afraid to stand your ground. The tension that had been building all night suddenly shifted. The crowd sensed it too. People started murmuring in excitement rather than awkward anticipation. Then Shaq did something no one expected. He took a step back, nodded once, and said, "All right then. If the rule says I'm not on the list, I guess I'm not getting in." The manager nearly choked. Wait, Mr. O'Neal, please. Of course, you're welcome inside. There's been a mistake, But Shaq held up a hand, silencing him. Nah, this man did his job, and I respect that. I wasn't sure what to say. It wasn't every day that a celebrity as big as Shaq just accepted being turned away. He looked at me one last time, then grinned. But I'll tell you what, Marcus. You're coming with me. I frowned. Sir? Shaq reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and started typing something. You ever thought about working personal security? I was caught off guard. Well, I've done security for a while, but... He smirked. Yeah, but not like this. Before I could process what was happening, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a notification from an unknown number. Shaq grinned wider. That's my team. They're gonna call you. The manager was staring at me like I had just won the lottery. Maybe I had. Shaq gave me one final nod, then turned and walked back toward the SUV. The crowd parted for him, whispers and excited chatter following in his wake. I stood there, phone still in my hand, my heart racing. I had done my job. I had stuck to my principles. And somehow in the end, that had led to an opportunity I never could have imagined. As I stood there, still gripping my phone, the realization of what had just happened slowly started to settle in. The crowd was still buzzing, people murmuring about the unexpected turn of events. A few even patted me on the back as if I had just won some kind of invisible battle. The manager, still looking stunned, finally found his voice. Marcus, do you have any idea what just happened? I glanced at him, unsure how to respond. Yeah, I think I just got offered a job. His mouth opened and closed a few times before he shook his head, laughing nervously. That was Shaquille O'Neal, and he just gave you his number. I looked down at my phone again, staring at the message notification. It was real. It was all real. Look, Marcus, the manager continued, lowering his voice. I might have overreacted earlier. You handled that situation with professionalism, and I respect that. He hesitated. And obviously, he respects that too. I could tell he was trying to make sure I didn't hold a grudge. Maybe he was worried I'd walk out right then and there. But I wasn't thinking about quitting. Not yet, at least. I nodded. I appreciate that, sir. He let out a relieved breath. Good. Listen, take a break. Process all of this. Hell, if you want the rest of the night off, I'd understand. I thought about it for a moment, but my instincts told me to finish my shift. This job was all I had known for years, and as much as the thought of working security for someone like Shaq was mind-blowing, I needed to stay grounded. I'll finish my shift, I said firmly. The manager gave me a strange look, half surprised, half impressed. All right, your call. As the night continued, I found myself thinking about Shaq's words over and over again. You remind me of myself back in the day. That stuck with me. By the time my shift ended, the club had quieted down, and I finally had a moment to sit alone in the break room. The message from Shaq's team was still on my screen, waiting. After a deep breath, I finally opened it. Marcus, this is Shaq's security coordinator. He was impressed with you tonight. If you're interested, we'd like to set up a meeting to discuss an opportunity. I stared at the words for a long time. This wasn't just some casual offer. This was real. I typed out a response. I'm interested. When and where? Almost instantly, another message came through. Tomorrow afternoon. We'll send you the details. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Tomorrow. Everything I had worked for, every long shift, every difficult customer, every moment I had stood my ground. It had all led to this. The next afternoon, I found myself sitting in a high-end hotel lounge, waiting. I had dressed in my best suit, but even then, I felt out of place. Then, the doors opened, and Shaq himself walked in. He grinned when he saw me. Marcus, my man. I stood up, shaking his massive hand again. Sir? He chuckled. Relax. You're off duty now? We sat down and he wasted no time getting to the point. I need people around me who know how to handle situations with respect, but who also don't get intimidated. You proved last night that you got both. I nodded, listening intently. My team needs guys like you, he continued. Loyal, disciplined, sharp. You in. I barely had to think about it. Yes, sir. He smiled. Good answer. And just like that, my life changed. Over the next few weeks, I transitioned from being a club security guard to working in private security for one of the most recognizable athletes in the world. The first time I traveled with Shaq, I realized just how different this world was. Private jets, exclusive events, high-profile clients. It was nothing like the long nights standing outside a club, checking names on a list. But no matter where I went, I stuck to the same principles that had gotten me here. Respect the job, follow the rules, treat everyone fairly. One night after an event, Shaq patted me on the shoulder. You know, Marcus, most people think success comes from being the loudest guy in the room. He shook his head. But sometimes it comes from just doing the right thing when no one else will. I thought back to that night outside the club, when I had refused to back down just because of a name. He was right, and I had never been more sure that I had made the right choice.